Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. And special thank you to Claire Joster for proposing this HR-focused webinar on the value of reconversions of skills. For those of you who don't know me already, I am Susana Rodriguez, Madrid VP of the British Chamber and Chief Commercial Officer at Savills Aguirre Newman, a British-Spanish centenary real estate firm. Just as the British Chamber that has existed for over 100 years, and it is the only independent British-Spanish business organization whose mission is the promotion of business and investment between British and Spanish companies, the development of actions to increase the business and visibility of our members, and the defense of interests of our members and the dialogue with the different governments. Since the beginning of the pandemic, the British Chamber has successfully organized more than 50 virtual sessions with experts where we have addressed current business issues, organized bilateral meetings and conferences with the stakeholders from Spain and the UK, and we have held our fortnightly virtual meetings with Chamber members, among other activities. Today's session is part of a series of briefings with expert partners that we organize with members of the Chamber to keep you informed of current business issues. Continuous training in digital skills is key, even more so for the reconversion and recovery of the economy in these difficult times we are living. This requires an effort from both the company and the employer. Claire Joster is a multinational executive and middle management search firm. Its international division focuses on global and specialized recruitment with a strong technological and human approach. Part of Eurofirms Group, the leading national human resources company with an annual turnover of more than 400 million euros, 1,000 employees and 30 years of experience in the market. Moving along, I would like to introduce you to our two first speakers for today. Starting with Carla Cabrera, who has over 10 years of experience in executive recruitment, talent and development. Strong expertise in key account management and international business development. She spent 3 years based in Oxford in the UK as a HR advisor at Ferrovial in the UK, and 4 years based in Istanbul, Turkey as executive director at a multinational executive recruitment firm. Currently, Carla is director at Claire Joster International, fostering its expansion worldwide. And now moving on to Jennifer Martin, who is half British, half Brazilian, and she settled in Spain 16 years ago. Her professional background is in hospitality management and international recruitment, joining Eurofirms Group in 2018. Currently in the team of Claire Joster International as a consultant in charge of business development activities for the division. Before we begin, please allow me to remind everybody to mute their microphones throughout the conference. You can submit all of your questions through the chat. And if any questions remained unanswered, we will respond to them after the session. So now welcome everybody, and I will hand it over to our experts. So please.
Good morning, Susanna. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank the British Chamber for the opportunity to organize this event with us. It is a great way to connect multiple players in a diverse scope of industries around a subject that is and will be crucial in our everyday lives in the next years to come. I will share my presentation. I will start today's webinar with some very relevant data. The World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs Report 2020 states that 43% of businesses surveyed are set to reduce their workforce and 34% plan to expand their workforce due to technology integration. The future of work has already arrived in many industries, making the skills gap in the world's 3 billion strong workforce one of the most urgent challenges for governments, businesses, and workers alike. Considering the future that awaits us, I'd like to ask you a question. How can you, as a business leader, upgrade and equip your people with a level of skills the future requires? The answer is upskilling. To upskill is to provide training that enhances an employee's existing skill set, allowing them to grow in their current role and bring added value to an organization. Whether it is in quality, speed, productivity, efficiency, and even all the irreplaceable soft skills that machines cannot provide. What can you do for your employees when a lack of the required skills to survive is identified? And how do you adapt in the rising age of digitization and automation? The answer is reskilling. To reskill is essentially to learn entirely new skills outside of the current skill set and allow people to shift their career onto a new path to a more promising future. This is applicable when an employee's post has become redundant and the employer looks to retain the worker by training them in a new discipline. Why is it relevant in today's business context? Companies must be aware of these trends so that they can future-proof their workforce and make themselves more attractive to prospective job candidates. Ground realities suggest that changes in technology had been taking place faster than any application for changes in the academic curriculum reaches the Education Board. So it is very unlikely that students will be prepared due to the rapidly changing demands of the market. Continued learning and development in the workplace has always been vital for businesses to grow and succeed. A stagnant workforce that does not move with the times will inevitably find itself lacking in skills necessary to advance in the marketplace. In addition, technological advancements and the changing expectations of employees mean that a business that fails to implement an effective upskilling and reskilling strategy will struggle to attract and retain top talent, dramatically falling behind its competition. So it becomes clear that companies and business leaders looking for the learning agility in their actual and future employees, which will allow them to stay on top of the learning and development activities in their organization, must place upskilling and reskilling at the top of their agendas. According to data gathered in the Future of Jobs Report 2020 of the World Economic Forum, it is estimated that by 2025, 85 million jobs may be displaced by a shift in the division of labor between humans and machines. Only 4 years from now, 97 million roles may emerge that are more adapted to the new division of labor between humans, machines, and algorithms. So what do you do now to prepare for the future scenario?
Jennifer, I guess I'll take over from here. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, first of all, for being here with us today. And as you can see, we have a wide variety of industries represented in this event today. And yet this topic is becoming very relevant to all of you, in despite of the industry you are in. We wanted this webinar to be very practical. So when you go home, you have things that you could implement right away. And Jennifer, you can start sharing the screen. I will switch off my camera to ease the connectivity, if you allow me to do that. So let's look at a few interesting facts. A McKinsey global survey done in February 2020 found that 9 in 10 C-level executives are either already facing skills gaps in their organizations or expect gaps to develop within the next 5 years. Mercer carried out a similar study in 2019, showing that upskilling and reskilling programs moved up in priority. The COVID pandemic only increased the urgency. From the employee perspective, just so you know, if you are an employer, upskilling and reskilling are essential to survival and long-term employability to them. Now, how to implement a reskill and upskill program? I'll walk you through it in 4 blocks: the before, the middle, the end, and we will finish with critical things to take into consideration when implementing these plans. So we make it very practical for you. Now, before we get started, what are the things to consider when planning an upskill and reskill program? We're going to look at the duration, the ROI, and who should get reskilled. If we look at the length, what's the perfect length? We would recommend programs to last a minimum of 2 weeks to a maximum of 4 weeks. How do you measure the ROI? That's a $1,000,000 questions. I would advise to look at this. For instance, the learner's emotional response to the course, the learner's behavioral change. You could take, for instance, 360-degree feedback from the employee's team to know if the training made any change in the behavior on a day-to-day basis. Has the employee become more efficient or not? And then you could look at whether the program has had an impact on the customer satisfaction. When deciding who should get reskilled, you should first run a macro analysis, understanding where your industry is going, what your competitors are doing. And then we go a level down below, the micro analysis, understanding what your customers value the most and what more could they value if you could provide it. Then you are ready to identify in-house what roles are in direct alignment with what your clients need the most. You could identify the skills required for those roles and identify 5 areas for each skill. Then I wanted to show you as well a brief formula on how you could calculate the ROI, which basically comes from dividing the net program benefit between the program costs. If you want to do the percentage, you would just apply times 100 and then you get the percentage. In the execution phase in the middle, the first thing we want to do is the skills assessment. To assess the skills, you can, for instance, build a competency meter, meaning identify what are those competencies, break them down into specific behaviors you want to see, and quantify them to be able to measure the progress. You have plenty of paid tools as well as free guides to do so, but if you have any further questions, we are more than happy to help you with. You could also build a roadmap from today to the future. So your plan should include a roadmap for employees to get from where they are today to where they want to be in the future. And be mindful of these 3 audiences you will have for sure. Those people who need to learn new skills to remain in their current position, those employees who need more substantial reskilling to move into a new role, and those for whom there's no immediate next job. So you will probably have those 3 audiences. So your organization must both define these 3 pathways and identify which channels applies to each person best. Just be mindful of that. Then if we look at the tools, make sure whatever tool you use, they are agile. That means available at any time from anywhere. You know how it is, our days can become so unpredictable, I would say. So make sure they are available in any mobile device. Then they should be customized to each individual to track their progress and suitable to the way they learn best. In my opinion, one-fits-all type of solutions are rarely successful. They should blend online and offline sessions. Many studies have shown that this is the more efficient way to reach to someone, so that the offline support, it facilitates the engagement with the training. Another idea could be to assign someone within the organization. I'm sure you all have that top performer in-house that excels at a particular skill, and you could pair them with those in need of that skill. Another alternative is to partner up and collaborate with product companies, clients, and content providers. That could reduce the budget, so you could always offer your services for free in exchange of their support with your upskilling and reskilling. If you go with a paid provider, make sure they offer training in emerging technologies, such as cloud computing, cybersecurity, digital marketing, data analytics, and project management. I would mention this because they are super relevant nowadays and they're emerging technologies, as I said, but they should also provide you support with needs particular to your business. And of course, in case of a provider, try to get one that comes with a stamp of approval, officially approved, I mean. Then here is a practical example that I wanted to show you of an upskilling and reskilling program on a budget. This is something that you could do yourself. And I wanted to list a few low-cost resources that could be used regardless you are an employer or an individual, a professional. For instance, we have a learning management system. I think, Jennifer, if you click again, the effects will pop up. Yes, thank you. So you have here a learning system management, for instance, Go Skills. This is a platform quite well structured for managing content. Then you have a content provider as Coursera, where most of the courses have a pretty low cost. And then two project management tools that I personally like, Asana and Trello. And they will allow you to stay organized and track the progress of your employees when completing their trainings. So as you can see, these are resources that are on a budget and could facilitate the possibility of having an upskilling and reskilling program on a pretty reasonable price. Now, on the finish line, once the training is completed, we still have work to do. We have still homework. Your organization needs to adopt a growth mindset and embrace a lifelong learning. The skills and career paths should be in constant evolution according to market's needs. And within 3 to 6 months, I would say, post-training, the employee should be allocated to a new project aligned with a new skill learned. Otherwise, the ROI is 0. Yeah, and make sure you can measure constantly the impact on the business for that training, because again, otherwise it's really difficult to justify that expense for the upper management. Now, things to consider. First of all, make it a responsibility of the manager. Managers can be great at training teams as they have a better understanding of their strengths and weaknesses. Co-working spaces. If you are small, and I believe many of you here in this webinar today have a pretty reasonable size, working in a co-working space could help your employees engage with others in the field and learn other best practices that help them hone their skills. Cross-train your employees. One of the greatest benefits of this is that you can improve business continuity even if one of your key people is unavailable. Sponsor employees access to education. This is something that I've personally used in the past and has helped me a lot to feel engaged with my employer. One of the best methods to optimize the success of your upskilling and reskilling program is to sponsor your employees access to education. For instance, you have student loan debt repayment on-the-job certifications, or tuition reimbursements. You have plenty of formulas here. Super important, number 5, get buy-in from C-level. A majority of executives have little understanding, in my opinion, of what it will take to meet the reskilling challenge, or at least at the level needed. And so the cost for the C-level is often a concern. So there is a need for your firm to get buy-in from leadership when creating your upskilling and reskilling plan. Managers that are not committed to these programs, be aware that they could become eventually blockers. I wanted to bring to your attention 3 success stories that I really liked from 3 well-known players. And they came up with 3 different approaches to upskilling and reskilling their employees. For instance, let's look at Amazon. This tech giant pledged $700 million in upskilling and reskilling, which includes machine learning programs, transitioning to software engineering careers, on-the-job apprenticeships, or expanding the Amazon Web Service training. And they are also, I believe, giving certifications to strengthen the cloud skills of their employees. If we look at PricewaterhouseCoopers, they've spent $3 billion to cover the costs of taking employees away from clients and putting them in classrooms. And the focus, of course, is on digital training. IBM, in contrast, they built a platform named Skills Build in 2019, so pretty recent, with the goal of identifying job skills and employment opportunities for members of disadvantaged communities. They are hiring truck drivers, teachers, retail workers, fast food workers, and in just about 20 weeks, they get them through a computer science degree, aiming for them not only to acquire those skills, but truly become highest performers in those roles. So as you can see, 3 very different approaches from 3 well-known players. I would like to leave you with this reflection. It's just a personal thought, but often we blame governments for the unease in society, job loss, but we as individuals and companies hold great power and responsibility to upskill and reskill our employees and be in service of others who might benefit from our skills. So either you're a company or an individual, you could always help others with your skills. Just have that in mind. Now I'll connect my camera just for a sec. I would like to introduce you to our next keynote speaker, Michelle Davis. She's VP People at WeFarm. At WeFarm, they bring together millions of farmers to share knowledge and access to quality products. They have a trusted community of more than 2 million farmers. Michelle comes with a management certificate in human resources with distinction in British Columbia Institute, as well as other degrees in event marketing and French literature. So Michelle, thank you so much for being with us today, and I pass the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you. So I don't have slides, but I can definitely chat to this topic a bit.
Sure.
So I guess a bit of background on me. I'm currently with WeFarm, but I've spent my entire people career in global startups from 20 people to over 300 people, usually distributed teams, multiple countries, and most often in tech. I've been through all the highs and lows of startups, large exits, but also redundancies and shutting down businesses and stuff that goes with the other end of it. And a lot of my career has been expanding businesses across borders. So lots of distributed teams, the world we live in now in terms of everybody being remote. I got into HR because I love helping people grow and develop, which in turn grows the business. And so our topic today is obviously very key to what I do in my day-to-day life. I joined WeFarm just over 3 months ago, but I've known them for years, having met the director of ops at an event a few years ago. We stayed in touch, and when they were looking for their first full-time people person, it was an easy decision to join this innovative international business, and as you said, very mission-driven, connecting farmers. WeFarm's a large platform for small-scale farmers. There are around 400 to 500 million farmers around the world, and they drive one of the most important industries in the world, 70% of the food that we consume, right? Before WeFarm, there was no way for them to connect at scale, to share knowledge, and to combine their buying power. So there's a real need for a platform like ours. And it's sort of a COVID-proof industry, right? Food is always going to be there. It's something that's really important these days. And also in terms of what we believe and how our business is designed, we're a mission-driven business that obviously powers our people as well, right? They're very focused on the mission and driven by what we do. None of us can pretend that the last year hasn't affected us, changing businesses around the world, being forced to work remotely, even if we wanted to work remotely before, and trying to keep our teams together and develop them remotely is obviously a very different thing than it is to get everybody together and do training programs. What's interesting about what we do, and I'm sure Aisha and others in agricultural feed will share similar experiences, is that food's always there, and now's the time where that access to information is really vital, where in-person contact and travel isn't possible. So the technology in the agriculture space and bringing people together is more important than before. Obviously, what has changed for us in the last year as a global company, we've got operations in London, Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, and Kampala, is not a unique situation. This year's been hard as a team, constant readjustment for everyone in the business, and in a people function where you're constantly thinking about how we connect people when flights are impossible, you can't work in an office. How do we bring them together, align the vision, the farmers, and ensure we're working together to achieve that success? And this sort of goes to the reskilling piece. The world we work in now, and as you said before, the world that will continue to evolve, because I don't think anybody expects to go back to an office 5 days a week or be on business flights every couple of weeks again, which we've done in the past. That used to be normal for me, be on a plane once a month, is very different. So a lot of businesses, like ours included, initially just tried to replicate the office environment, creating virtual lunchrooms, the really fun 8-hour blocks of online training on Zoom. That's not the reality anymore, right? So we can't wait till we can be together again. We have to really move with those changes and develop. But as I said, at WeFarm, we've always been spread out across countries and continents. So work from home was easy. That was the easy bit. But it's hard because we used to put an emphasis on putting each other together. We do week camp once a year where we'd fly to London or to Nairobi and get together for a week and really spend time together and do a lot of the learning and stuff there. A lot of the upskilling, reskilling would happen at that forum. We can't do that anymore. That's not a thing anymore. So how do you replicate that and create space for people to develop and really make constant learning? Like learning has to be part of your culture on an ongoing basis in a way that it didn't before. You could focus more on individual events. What we've learned over this year is that a different set of skills is also required to thrive in a truly remote first business. I think this year has showed that the pace of change is exponential in a way that it hasn't been before. Startups have always had to evolve as they grow, but this requires new skills and behaviors on the team. The companies that will succeed and make the most of this opportunity in a much more rapidly changing world than ever before are those whose teams can evolve their skills and the new business realities along the way. The benefit to a business like ours and to startups and where I've spent my entire career is that change is constant and always has been. If you're building a business and creating a product that has never existed before, you have to evolve. You're constantly learning and testing things, which means upskilling and reskilling your team on an ongoing basis. I mean, I would usually call it learning and development because it's part of the culture. It is foundational to who we are and creating that culture of constant learning in the business. The other thing that's unique to startups, I think, at least all the ones that I've been in my experience, is that we hire individuals, not titles. So it's hard to look at that matrix specifically of reskilling and these specific skills because every job is tailored to the person so they can make the most of it. And anybody who's been in a startup knows that that job will change. It will evolve as the business evolves, right? I was incredibly lucky early in my career that my first business, I was the 20th employee and grew with them to over 300 people. We scaled internationally, opened 6 offices, sold some businesses, bought some businesses. Like, that evolution was not, my job title was the same for 6 years. It was not the same job for 6 years, not even close. So WeFarm's lucky to have an incredible team, which of course we all say, but also the scale up approach to hiring, in my experience, is different, right? It's a two-way street. You're hiring the best people for WeFarm for the long term, not for the role today, which means that development has to be core to who we hire. We have to hire people who want to learn, who want to grow their skills, who are constantly craving that. But then we have to prove to them that we will be good guardians of that. And we have to create the systems and processes where learning is part of the culture and they constantly see themselves developing and upskilling and learning new things. The other piece of that is that growing a business is easier to do, right? If you hire great junior people and develop them, that is cheaper for your business. But it's also scalable, right? You create a team that will develop the next team. And you create that culture of learning throughout the business. I mean, the nature of the constant evolution of innovative tech is you're hiring for that desire to learn and grow, that challenge for new things. Nobody gets into a startup because they want their 9 to 5 to be the same every day. That is, if that's what you're doing it wrong. You need to be there because you want to build something and create something that's never existed before, to try new things. And that inherently creates that reskilling, upskilling culture where you're constantly learning and constantly trying new things. I mean, my role is not the same as it was when they hired me 4 months ago, right? They knew they needed a full-time people person. It was that time in the evolution of the business, but my role is not what it was on the hiring platform. That's not the reality of what I have to do day to day, because you get into a role, you bring your own background to it, and you evolve it. And that's what I mean, hiring the right people for the business who will grow with the opportunity. Our business isn't the same as it was 3 months ago, let alone a year ago. And that's even before you factor in global pandemics, right? You're in a startup, you're constantly evolving the business and testing things with customers, figuring out what works, adjusting a little bit. So that static job description doesn't work. That said, I will caveat that we did introduce job descriptions earlier this year because it was sort of a factor of the remote world, right? You didn't know who to go to for what anymore. We have 65 people. We had scaled past that sort of comfortable 30 people, everybody knows what's going on stage. But we were very clear that we wanted to make them outcome based. So 2 to 3 key outcomes. What is your impact on the business? What are you responsible for? Because it still creates that sense of ownership for their own development and their own opportunities, and they have ultimate ownership of that piece of the world. They're also written by the individuals in the roles. We don't write them for them. We obviously proofread them, make sure they make sense, and make sure not too many things overlap. But we want them to own that, to create that clarity of ownership so that everybody else knows what's going on and how we're all aligned to the mission in this remote world. And so I'll tie it back into upskilling and reskilling. That's where it comes back to the upskilling and reskilling. I think some things are unique to the individual, and we ask them to lead on their own development. I can't tell you where you want to be in a year. I can't tell you what your goals are and whatever you want to do. Each individual has a dedicated learning budget. Spend however you want. We will also sponsor certifications, all those certifications in tech stuff or finance, that kind of thing. And they work with their line manager to figure out where they want to be in the future and how they want to evolve with our business, but also beyond. And that's often a difficult conversation to managers have. This can be more traditional things, like I said, the certifications, but also the softer stuff often is what comes up. When people really want to evolve with the business or move into leadership roles, you have to think about some of that stuff that's less technical and less black and white, like coaching their teams, confidence in presentations. It is much harder to measure the ROI, but you will see it. You will see that impact on the business in a way that you may not be able to qualify with the degree that they've come back with. What also means is you need to create that culture where it's comfortable to tell your technical development manager that you actually want to move into marketing or that you want to go start your own business in a few years. That's actually great. And that's something I encourage in our managers. It's definitely something you have to train into managers because it is not always a comfortable conversation. But if you can give them the opportunity to be constantly evolving, developing with the team, maybe reskill them, give them some exposure to marketing, maybe give them some exposure to another department, or maybe they want to understand how the business works in the back. They want to spend some time with finance. They will stay with you longer. You will save money because you will retain that employee for longer, but they will also leave having made the most of the experience of their time with you, right? Your current and past staff are your best advocates as a business. The only way you will, like, everybody knows it only takes 5 bad Glassdoor reviews before people don't want to talk to you as incoming employees, right? So you need to make sure that they feel empowered and they feel like you've given them everything you can in the time that they're there. And often it's really small. Like, think about that opportunity. Could you invite them to this meeting so they have exposure to that? What could that look like? The other side of that is, you know what's coming. As a business, I know for a fact that employees are often, especially in startups, the biggest cost line, right? If you know that somebody's going to leave, if you know that their goal is to be with you for 2 years, fine, you can start to think about who their backfill is. You can start to succession plan in a way that you can't if you haven't had that honest conversation. But reskilling effectively requires you to know their strengths and the goals of the individuals on your team. Again, you have to train that into managers. We had that conversation fairly recently because we're doing our next review cycle, but that's not human nature. It's not a default as a manager to go, oh, it's okay if you leave in 2 years. Like, that's not a comfortable conversation. So you need to empower them with those skills as well. But it was a great case study for us was recently we reorganized the East African offices. So we had country-based functional role or country-based roles, which meant we had a country manager, we had an admin person in each office, but they weren't sharing that information across borders. And it also, our goals in future are to scale and open more countries and open more markets. That's not scalable. It means I need to replicate that group of 6 every place we go. So by having those one-on-one conversations, our new COO literally sat down with every person on that team and said, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? What are the things that you get excited about every day? We were able to not lose anyone and reallocate everybody into those new functional roles. So a sales team that works across the region and an ops team that works across the region, an account management team that works across the region. So we're making the best of the knowledge that's in those teams and using the best skills across those markets instead of it just being isolated into one market. And those people now have exposure to the global team. They're working directly with a lot of the leadership. They have that opportunity to upskill themselves and get that exposure in a way they didn't have before necessarily in the country teams. So there's no cost to hire. We removed a huge amount of admin burden. Like, the amount of time being lost because 3 people were doing the same thing was ridiculous. And we keep that institutional knowledge because those people are able to evolve with us. They don't hit a plateau when they hit a certain level. And that's been really powerful. Like, the engagement in that team is really high right now, which it could have gone completely the other way. Had we just shuffled people in roles and said you have to reapply for your jobs, then it would have been a very different conversation than knowing where they wanted to be and being able to have that conversation with them. The other thing in terms of reskilling, upskilling is how we do business has changed in the last year, right? I'm sure we sit on 8 hours a day of Zoom or team calls. Most of us aren't good at keeping engaged and keeping people engaged when you're talking in that format. So presentation skills, things like that the whole team needs. Like, that is something that universally I think everybody could use these days. Writing is the other side of that, is because we're using the written word more. We're not having a conversation across a water cooler where you can clarify your point. Being able to write it we use Notion and Slack and emails all the time. Being able to write it in a clear, concise way is a powerful tool that some people don't have anymore because they're used to just having those quick conversations. So really reinforcing a lot of those skills that are fairly foundational, but we've lost in the way we've worked in the last little while, is something that I think we've really realized in the last year we need to double down on in terms of upskilling the whole team. And then I touched on this earlier, but nobody stays at a company their entire career anymore. Rarely do they stay in the same job. There's tons of stats on this, so I'm not going to dwell, but you have to make the most of the time they're with you. And there's lots of cliche quotes, but there's no point in putting people in roles and leaving them there. They'll plateau and eventually drop off. People are craving that development, craving that opportunity to grow, especially if you've hired them right for a small business that needs that constant learning. So you need to proactively lead the way to make sure that's the case for the team. If you continue upskilling them, they will make a bigger impact in their current role and those to come. Of course, that means that you're giving them skills that they could leave. That is always the fear of some senior managers is, well, if I pay for their training, they're more qualified than the job. Well, yes, but hopefully in 6 months, there's a job for them in that role. Be clear about what those opportunities are. And they leave because they get bored. They leave because they're not learning. High performers that you've hired for their desire to learn and grow with you will feel they need to feel challenged and rewarded. They could get a job anywhere, but they'll stay where they're learning and evolving. That's so important. And if you can create that culture of upskilling, reskilling, learning and development, whatever you want to call it, it has to be foundational to your culture, where learning and growth is just part of who you are. It's part of the individual, but then it becomes part of the team. That will develop your business if your individuals are able to develop. If you build a great team with a culture of learning, they'll grow with you, and it has a multiplying effect. They'll develop others. They will not stick to their rigid job specs. They'll create other learners around them, right? They'll create that culture where always try a little bit harder, always develop a skill, be coaching others. If you hire those people with drive and build a team around them, they'll help you build the business. So, could obviously talk about this for a while, but that's all I've got today.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much for your presentation, your pitch. I think it was very inspiring, a compelling story to tell. Now, I would like to introduce everyone to Aisha Rahim, co-founder of Farms to You, a marketplace for natural food that aims to bridge the gap between farmers and consumers. Aisha comes with a bachelor degree in Queen's Mary University of London and a foundation course in social sciences.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me. And yeah, it was great really speaking with Michelle. She's covered quite a bit, so I don't think I'm going to go over it too much. But yeah, at Farms to You, when we interview people to join our team, at the time of the interview, whatever skills that person has is redundant, because we live in such a fast-paced world that there are new technologies like every other day. There are new ways of doing things. So, having that learning on the job culture and wanting to get more knowledge all the time is very much ingrained in our DNA. A bit of background on Farms to You. So we are a digital platform focused on smallholder farmers, currently with operations in Nigeria, with a vision to expand across sub-Saharan Africa. So what we do is use digital solutions to help farmers farm better using data. As Michelle has already mentioned, smallholder farmers make up a significant percentage of, the agriculture space, but yet they lack access to resource and access to the expertise that they need to improve their yield and to also get to market. And if you think about things like climate change, that just adds even more complexities, because how a farmer farmed last year will be very different from this year, because for instance the Harmattan season or things like the desert locust storms in East Africa, how does a farmer stay up to date with those sort of things? So by default, our team has to be learning on the job, as we also intend to teach our farmers, how do you stay on top of the game and, keep ahead of any challenges you face. So, that's a bit of background on Farms to You. I'll do a short presentation just to allow for any questions in the audience. But from a team perspective, in terms of how we approach training, we're a team of less than 10, but we dedicate one day of the week to just learning new skills. And that's something that is very much driven by the individual. So I wouldn't tell you, go learn this. It's like, if you think that this is a course that would help you in your role, and it could be something that is quite tangential to what you're currently doing, but you'll be surprised as to how, you can learn skills from other areas. So for instance, sometimes I paint. I'm not an artist. I don't consider myself Van Gogh, but sometimes just to get away from work, I would get involved in other things. And from that creative aspect, because my mind is quieter, I might actually think about things of, how to approach problems we're facing at pharmacy from a different perspective. So it's good to encourage your team to really have that diversity of thought. We talk a lot about diversity of people, but diversity of thought is also very important in terms of driving innovation. You can't have everybody thinking the same way. Otherwise, how do you keep things in check? So that diversity of thought is very much ingrained in our DNA. So we use things like plural sites. It's so easy to learn new skills. Since graduating from university in 2011, the number, so I've done the CIMA course, the Chartered Institute of Management Accounting. I've done an IMC. This is when I was in finance. So I wouldn't go into my history of how I left asset management to actually come into agri-tech. That's not the topic of discussion. But coming from since graduating, a lot of self-learning. So the number of courses, the number of self-learning I've done, so much outpaces my university degree. And when I think about university gave me the tools on how to think, in a structured way. But I had that, without the drive and the constant learning and actually seeing that, okay, the industry's changing, what do I need to do? It's difficult to have a fulfilling career in the sense that you're not keeping. So yeah, my personality in terms of addressing training and reskilling, upskilling all the time is something that we also communicate across the team. So my co-founder as well, Timmy, very, very big on training as well, always getting the guys to learn, the developers to learn new ways of doing things as well. How to, when new software codes come into the market, how do you test that, and just working with the team to trial those things out. Collaborative tools, because obviously we're working more virtually than before. We use things like Mattermost, which is similar to Slack, and sometimes we can actually have we have virtual hackathons. If you're not familiar with hackathons, they're typically, pre-COVID, they were more of an interactive session where people are physically, hacking a solution within a short space of time. And we've actually been able to do that digitally. So everybody logs onto a Google Meet and are able to, so we have a problem that we're solving, and then everyone is interacting on how to do that. So kind of mimicking the in-person office experience. It's not the same. I don't think we can totally erode physical interactions, because we've actually had a couple of in-person meetings this year, within COVID restrictions, because that one-on-one interaction is still important. But, there are lots of virtual tools to really help you get going on that. So that's just a brief about me and also our approach in terms of learning at pharmacy. So I don't know if anyone has any questions for me. I guess no questions.
Eva?
Thank you so much, Aisha. I think the questions will come in a sec.
Okay.
Yes,
sure.
Thank you.
Morning, this is Eva Prada. I'm the Managing Director of the British Chamber of Commerce in Spain. First of all, let me thank all the speakers so far for tackling a topic that I think is of interest of all of us, both from a corporate perspective and a personal perspective. I've especially enjoyed listening to people from sectors that are not the typical ones that we would have been thinking for upskilling and reskilling, and some sectors that to me were not so well known, like the case of farms to you. I would like to ask people if they're interested in making questions, and while I allow time for people to put questions through the chat, I'd like to start with one that has come to my mind while I was listening to you. My question is, how much of this upskilling and reskilling has to be left to the employee, and how much has to be left to the company? And if you've got any specific examples that you could give us. And the question could be for either the speakers from the companies or from Claire Joster's team, whoever feels more capable of responding to this question.
I mean, I'm happy to take that question. I spoke very short, so I think it's equally important on both sides. So Michelle made a valid point that no one stays at the baby boomer generation, like our parents stayed at jobs for 20 years. You don't really have anybody doing that anymore. So it's about keeping the job interesting, and it's a more so previously, again, if you look at the previous generation, you had a career path where you moved from analyst to associate to partner, different levels. Again, that's very different in the world of today. So in terms of how we approach that from the employee and employer perspective, it's having regular one-to-ones. So things like, where do you see yourself? What do you want to do? So actually, at the early stage of onboarding people into the team, we actually ask them, what do you want to work on? So first of all, we explain what the company is, what do we do, what different departments are, and then get a vision of what do you want to do. Some people are interested in data analytics, but they don't necessarily have the skills. So it's kind of like, okay, maybe you shadow this person and eventually, do some courses, and you can eventually become an expert in that area. And also it's for the employer to also be able to identify the skills that person possesses. So something that we also do at Farms to You is we get our team. So first of all, after an offer is made, in the contract, we don't specify what the job role is, what the tasks are. That's up to the employee to. Obviously, we are hiring to fill a certain role, but then there's a discussion so that they don't feel like we're imposing what they should be doing. It's a mutual discussion, it's a mutual beneficial relationship. So we look at it as a marriage, as opposed to before, it's kind of like master and servant. That's how typically employment contracts used to work. But in the world of today, it has to really be a mutually beneficial thing, because having very skilled people is very it's hard to come by, because if you have a person that is laid back, which is a significant percentage of people, which is fine, if you have a person that is laid back, that's not very competitive for you, because what's that person's competitive advantage in the team? They can't see that, okay, this new technology might be a risk or a benefit to Farms to You, and then have a conversation with the team and say, guys, we should be thinking about this. We want our team to be able to have that accountability and ownership, to feel that, okay, they can make those sort of decisions. So it's equally important on both the employer and employee to have that vision and participate in that activity.
Should companies of all sizes have development plans for their employees? I'm thinking now of the Spanish culture, where you find, in fact, some of the examples that you've provided were large corporations. And we from the British Chamber of Commerce were trying to convey this message to all the companies, irrespective of their sizes and sectors, especially after a pandemic that has raised the adaptation to so many changes. Is that what you're experiencing in other markets as well, that this is more of the corporates rather than of the smaller companies?
Eva, in our opinion, from the recruitment side, I could assure that either large companies or small, medium enterprises should be already looking at upskilling and reskilling as a priority, because the market is just moving so fast, and in despite of the industry that you are in, this will be much required from the employee perspective, but also from the employer perspective.
I personally see this continuous learning as a source of motivation, because it's learning new things, it's challenging yourself for new things. But I've also faced occasions in which there are employees or members of the team who probably don't feel so capable. How can we motivate people? So it's two questions in one. On the one hand, how can we motivate those people that we think probably are not giving enough value to this upskilling and reskilling? And secondly, in moments that are critical, like this year, 2020, 2021, where keeping up to the turnover of our companies requires a lot of effort in terms of commercial activity. How can we balance finding time for our teams to dedicate to this development, which I think is going to be so necessary, but at the same time, delivering what we are asking our teams to do? I think probably both perspectives from Michelle and Aisha, and also from a recruiter, would be very interesting.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that a bit. I find it interesting because I think, and that's where we talk about the culture of learning. If it's just part of how you work and part of the day-to-day, it's inherent in how you do. We might not call it upskilling and reskilling, but it is a part of what you do every day. It's part of the business. And especially in times like now, where we are asking them to do more than ever before, they're having to learn new ways of working, figuring out life from home and how they communicate with each other. It's almost just identifying it. That is all learning, but identifying it as learning and development, because they don't, it just is. So they may not think of it that way, but really have that conversation of, look at how far we've come. Look at all these things we've done, right? We are not the same people we were a year ago. None of us are. So, but have we identified how we've changed and what skills we've learned in that time? Probably not. But if you're having that constant conversation, and as Aisha said earlier, like having that conversation with your manager, having that ongoing conversation of where do you want to be? How do you want to grow? It's an evolution, right? It should be a two-way conversation on an ongoing basis. And it's not, I think it's almost easier in a small business because you're constantly developing, it's constantly changing. Big corporates will have much better structured and bigger learning budgets, but there's tons of opportunity in the day-to-day work to create that space for development. And to be fair, that's why I stay in startups. That's why I turn down jobs at big corporates and keep working in small businesses. I like that speed of change and pace of things that you just don't get in a larger environment.
Yeah, so I definitely echo what Michelle has just said. I think, but I think the onus would be on the employer to motivate the team, because when people come into a new environment, they're typically shy or not trying to ruffle any feathers, or being very overly cautious. So it's first of all creating an environment where it's okay to fail, where it's okay to not do something right. There's I mean, typically in the corporate culture, you don't necessarily have that much flexibility.
I've lost Aisha.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Yeah.
We lost you for a few seconds.
Right, sure. So it's again something that can be embodied in corporate cultures, where junior staff have a very easy reach to the senior staff. They can book a coffee meet, virtual coffee meet, for instance, and have a conversation about what their future can be in terms of maybe shadowing a senior person in a role that they think that they can perform in. But really, I think the onus comes in terms of that motivation and the freedom for the employee to drive their own growth. The onus comes from the senior management to really help them feel comfortable that they can do such a thing.
I think we've got a very shy audience. There are no more questions, so I think I'm going to, conscious of time, I'm going to ask the final one. What about those occasions in which there are organizations where they allow you the time and they promote your sort of attitude to constant learning, but they really ask you to look for your own tools and your own places where you can do that? And I think Carla has given a number of platforms that are very useful for those. Are you also in favor of that sort of do-it-yourself attitude in terms of learning, rather than the company facilitating to you?
When you say do-it-yourself, I guess, so for instance, there are platforms like Pluralsight, Coursera.
Well, there are tutorials how to do anything. There is sound from someone. Can you hear me better now?
Yes. Yes, I was
just saying that there are no tutorials basically on anything. So this is why now the do-it-yourself option is possible. You just have to find the time and consult whoever you've got above that you're going to need that time to learn whatever you've been required.
Yeah, I think there are lots of tools where it's easy for you to drive your own development.
We're losing Aisha. Michelle, you want to chip in?
Sure. I mean, it's a difficult one. I think, as we said before, you need to create opportunities for people. Yes, I think development should be driven by the individual because it is so individual. I can't create paths that are going to be the same for everyone, but I have to create the space for them. I've written a very long list on our Notion page most recently for the development plans of, here's a bunch of ideas, here's suggestions of where you could learn, here's some great guest speakers, here's some TED Talks that I recommend. A lot of it's free, a lot of it's there, but you just need to create opportunities. People don't know. Often people just don't have visibility or they don't have that experience, right? This is my 4th, 5th, 6th startup, depending how you define it. So I have that experience and share that with people, right? Give them resources. I've introduced LinkedIn Learning, platforms like that. Create opportunities for people and give them the space, but don't be prescriptive, I guess, about what specific things they can use or can't.
Aisha, we lost you briefly. Do you want to come back with what you were saying?
Yeah, sure. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I'm sure Michelle has covered it as well. But tools like Pluralsight, Udemy, courses. So, for instance, like I said, we encourage the team to really have diversity of thought. So, pick a course that might not be a direct vertical alignment to your current role, but it's something that based on the market movement and future technologies is something that can actually help you in your current role. I mean, for instance, a person could be in marketing and want to do product management. Product management is not necessarily aligned to marketing, but if you do product management, you have a better understanding of how the product is designed, and as a result, how it can be sold. Ergo marketing. So it's not necessarily a straight through route, but it's something that there's skills that could be learned, from doing these other other courses. I think it's reasonable for a company to give a budget and also encourage the team to really pursue new skills. So, for instance, the last few weeks have been quite busy, and as a result, one of the team hadn't done any new courses. But what I made it a responsibility of mine to remind her that it's okay for you to take this time off. You have this budget, you haven't spent it. I know it's busy, but you should really consider taking this time. And three weeks later, she, after she was able to calm down with the increased workload, she'd started a course. So it's my responsibility, it's the management's responsibility to encourage that. Yes, your core role is busy, but it's still very okay for you to take time to learn, to keep learning. Because the thing is, the work never stops. Your to-do list it's infinite. It's never going to stop. But you have to keep learning, and learning is one of those things that it might not seem urgent now, but it's something you need to continuously do. Otherwise, you become a dinosaur. You don't move with the times, and you basically don't have the skills to do new things. We have data analytics, deep learning methods. We're living in a world where data is going to be a key driver of lots of activities. Are people equipped with those kind of skills to do those sort of things? So it's really getting your team to think futuristically. What do I need to do tomorrow, and not live in the past? I think that's how, for the company, it gives you a competitive advantage, and for the person, they're in an environment where they're like, oh great, I really can see myself growing here, and by growing here I can actually do something else. You have to give that an entrepreneur I think people have heard that term before. So INTRA, entrepreneur environment, where people feel like, you know what, I'm driving my future, my career, what I want to do, and I'm in an environment that really helps support that.
I totally agree with you. I'm glad that there are two people that have raised questions. One is Janine Mort, and I think it's a fairly difficult one to my view. She works for an international payments company, and her company has now asked her to explore the corporate payment sector in Spain. Due to the real estate market suffering so much during the pandemic and the crisis derived from the pandemic, she's asking how can she change the mindset and that of others that there is a need for corporate payments in Spain, and it is not just for the real estate sector. In my modest view, what I see here is two things. One, learning of a new area of business, but also changing that mindset of making aware a lot of the clients of that need. So that is also probably communications and sales skills, if I am right. And if I can launch the other question from Adam Segales, and with that, I think it's 10:40, so I think we could try to finish by 10:45, 10:50. Adam Segales' question is, do you propose the learning sessions after work or during work? Work plus learning can be tough for some people. Two very interesting questions, very different ones. Happy that the four of you have a go to answer them, and then I'll go for the closing.
Eva, in regards to the second question, I think it should be a two-way street. So the employer has to be committed to the employees' training, so they should allow these people to take some time from work to be spent on training. That's my personal view. Otherwise, there is no engagement there. Now, as for the first question, as you said, I think it's about finding the transferable skills that I find that in many areas there are quite a few common things. So it's about finding the transferable skills and getting yourself upskill to, master those.
Jennifer, Aisha?
So I'll go for the first one. I think there is an element of emotional intelligence that you need to apply when we're talking about things when it comes to pandemic. The team recently got a therapist we gave everyone the opportunity to speak to a therapist to help them given the challenges of the pandemic. In Nigeria, there was a protest that was, that didn't end very well. Of course, the Black Lives Matter movement, the whole world just seemed like it was on fire. You can't expect the person to come into work and just think, to ignore all the chaos happening outside. And, so actually getting a therapist in to be able to speak to each individual confidentially. It might sound very left to what your question is, but by trying to empathize with who this corporate payments you've mentioned, with who you want to deal with, by trying to empathize with them and really understanding because we live in a world where work and personal have kind of mixed and fused together. So people are in it in terms of their own personal challenges. So you really have to understand who you're talking to from that aspect so that you can empathize with them and really understand what their priorities are. I think having that skill and having that knowledge comes from you being able to empathize with yourself and understanding what your own personal goals are. I think by default that would help you in that in such an interaction. In response to the second question, so for instance, we work till 10 p.m. It's not something that, and when I say 10 p.m., we're not working from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. No, but we have such flexible timed timings that the team coordinates what works for us. So sometimes we have meetings on Saturday because maybe we had a hackathon from Wednesday to Thursday and then took Friday off. So we had a meeting on Saturday. So we're living in a world where it's not prescriptive. We're not doing the whole Monday to Friday. It's 9 to 5 because things happen. Sometimes you're working 18 hours in a day. If you're working 18 hours in a day, you shouldn't be expected to do another 8 hours the next day, right? So really having that flexible structure where, we're a small team of 10, we're 8 now, and we're a small team, so it's very easy to coordinate that. But as we grow, we would also keep that same culture where we're not going via a rule book. There's no rule to say that if you do your training during the day or after, it's more effective. No, it really depends on the team and what they prefer.
Okay, Jennifer, Michelle, anything else before we close?
Yes, actually, what Aisha was saying, I think, is something that is very important for everyone, that it has been in a company or in a position for way too long. I think what happens in many cases, and I get that from thousands of conversations and meetings with candidates that we had, people just don't realize how many other skills they have until one day their position is made redundant. So what I've seen in many cases is that people they didn't know that they were so far off the real world and what's going on outside, because they are inside their own bubble. So what I would encourage everyone is that each person needs to assess their skills. Where do they want to go? Where did they stop learning? Where did they really stop learning? And how many other things they could be learning. Like Aisha said, it doesn't actually need to be related to your job, but we are not just one position and one role, but we are many things, everyone. So I think I would encourage everyone who's listening on the employee side to assess what skills could you study on and evolve to then also complete the way you are working in your current role, which is really important. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything everybody said. A quick note for Janine, I think it was, the Spanish company. I think for me, I've expanded into markets several times over, and it's always a bit of a panic of like, I don't know what I'm doing over there. Networking, it doesn't really feel like learning, but networking, reaching out to the groups. I mean, this kind of organization will create introductions, talk to people who are already there, have those conversations. I do it now all the time for businesses that are moving into the US and stuff from the UK. So I had a call last night with somebody who was just on one of the forums I joined. Have that conversation. I think that's really powerful, and talk to other people. That's a huge area for learning, and just find the people who are there already and they'll be willing to help. And that might help change that mind a bit, I think. And yeah, just like everybody else has said, I think that flexibility and realizing that people are individuals and we're constantly learning. If you create that culture of learning, then work and life blends. Have those conversations, figure out what works for you. As you get a bit bigger, you will probably need to codify some of it. Like, we've got policies now that you get a day off. If you're doing a certification, you get a day off to study and a day off for the exam, because that was just happening anyways when we were smaller. That was accepted practice, and now you need to write it down so that everybody knows that. And you'll need to evolve a bit as you scale, but be flexible. They're individual human beings. You can't write a policy that's going to cover everyone.
Thank you. I think I'll be in touch with Janine, and we'll see whether, and thank you very much, Michelle, for mentioning that organizations like ours, we are precisely good at, when we don't have the answer, we know someone who will have the answer. So making connections and opening doors is what people pay us for. And this is the reason why being a group makes us much stronger than acting as individuals. There is a final question, but conscious about time, I think we've already replied. Ignacio Pastor is asking how individuals should focus their individual upskilling and reskilling. I feel that you replied that by saying that we all have to be conscious of what the market is demanding. So we have to be reevaluating. We have to be looking at platforms to see what are the skills and what are the knowledge that is required by the new jobs of the future, or by the natural evolution of companies in our market, in our sector. We do that. We, in the world of associations and business organizations, we frequently benchmark what others are doing, what is the progression that they're making. And this copy and paste is a very, it's a very healthy exercise of seeing where the future is going and which are the associations that inspire us, and what's the progress we want to make. So I guess it's just by looking outside, looking at us, identifying what are the competencies and the areas of knowledge that we need, and which are the actions and the platforms and the places where we can find that help. I can only thank everybody for their knowledge. Claire Joster for giving us this fantastic idea of going back to doing webinars on the topic of human capital, which is the real capital of organizations. For Aisha and Michelle, who have been a breath of fresh air because they've brought sectors and companies that were new to us, which is also something that we appreciate. And tell everybody that this is going to be recorded, that the slides will be available in our website, and to keep watching our website because we're doing webinars on a weekly basis and also meetings between our members. So we want to keep in touch with you and receive ideas of new topics and new webinars. Thank you and have a good day.